You're listening to a 4x4 Radio Network podcast.
The Centresteer Podcast, a Land Rover podcast by Land Rover owners. Welcome to the Centresteer Podcast, the only Land Rover podcast on the planet. This is show number 55. We should have the sign, the speed limit sign, 55, for October 2017. This is a podcast by, for, and about Land Rover owners. Visit our website, Centresteer.com, to listen to previous shows and for show notes, which have links to stories discussed in today's show. We're also part of the 4x4 Radio Network, and I invite you to check out the other shows that are 4x4 related at 4x4radionetwork.com. Thanks for your comments, follows, likes on the Facebooks, the Twitters, and the emails, which I've gotten several over the last month. And a special thanks to our Patreon subscribers. Visit patreon.com/Centresteer for all the details and to make a monthly contribution. A very special thank you to our Patreon subscribers helping to continue to make the show happen. It is indeed a labor of love. We do this out of the enjoyment of Land Rovers and talking about them. Patreon certainly helps to continue to do that. I think it's going to be the focus of our efforts here to keep the show going financially anyways. It does help out with web hosting and all those kinds of things. So thank you very much for that. A special thank you to, we have a Patreon subscriber joining us today, Michael Carnell. Welcome, Michael, to the show.
Thank you, sirs.
Michael is the editor of Just British Online Motoring Magazine, and later in the show, we'll talk to you in more detail about the magazine and your Land Rover connection. So, thanks again, Mike, for joining us, and thanks for being a Patreon subscriber. I know you told us earlier before we started the show, we're the only podcast that you support financially. So, thank you.
That is true. I listened to a bunch of them, unfortunately, but you're the only one that I actually financially put money into.
Yay. Thank you very much. As you may know, I'm your host, John Costage. Joining me via Skype from the great state of Vermont is Morgan.
Hey, how's it going today? So is this the 55 Stay Alive episode?
I was trying to think
of the top speed of a series Land Rover.
I was trying to think of something when I said it. I wish I had thought of that. We're not redoing the show, though. I'm not starting over. All I could think of was I can't drive 55, Morgan and I broke bread and also met in person only a few months ago. A few weeks ago, excuse me.
Yeah, months. Oh, time doesn't fly that quickly.
So Morgan was nice enough to host me, and we went, he lives in northern Vermont, and then we drove down to southern Vermont and visited with Jim Macri, who's our official guest of the month, and we saw in person the Centresteer prototype. He has rebuilt the Centresteer prototype. It's immaculate. It's magnificent. What other M words can we use that are? Oh, the M word. It's amazing, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And one of the things that I just couldn't help feeling after going and seeing it. This is my second time. Well, maybe 2.5 times if I count seeing the chassis with the rolling chassis that they had at British Invasion a number of years ago. But you see it there. It's a unicorn, and it looks like any other Land Rover. So it's just very bizarre to see it in real life, but it doesn't strike you as it's awe-inspiring, but it's not as mind-blowing as it really should be because it's physically there.
It's true, physically present. Yes, I called it Land Rover Nirvana North America because not only does he have, well, you Morgan got to see me in person, and I was actually, my mouth was agape, and I couldn't say anything. But there in this magnificent, and I keep using that M word, but this magnificent structure, this building that is built specially for his housing, his collection, and Jim does in fact have a collection of the Series Defender line. He has one to go. You'll find all this out later in the show when we talk about it in detail. But to give you a heads up, preview, he has one of every significant model of Series Defender, and he's working they're working on a Series 2, or is it 2A? It was a 2. I think it's a Series 2.
It was the 2.
2. 2 is the next one they're going to redo in their collections and take them, they think 2 years. But before they got to that point, and then it's like their next one, they decided to why not? Hey, kids, let's put on a show. And they built from scratch, because all the Centresteers, the original that prototype that was built, there was like 3 or 4 of them, maybe 2. They were scrapped, so all they have is pictures, and they use those pictures and they not rebuilt. They built a prototype. It's amazing, and it's as I said, that's why it's Nirvana, because you've got this museum quality. They look better than they probably came off the factory floor of a Series 1, 2A, a 3 with a fantastic matching trailer. I forget the name of the trailer company. Brockhouse. Thank you. There's a Series 3. There's a D90, Defender 90 there. It's just amazing. And we'll have pictures for you on the website, or a link at least to them. And I believe for our Patreon subscribers, because I should have done this by now, but I haven't done it, I think we're going to have a video, and at least we'll release that to our Patreon subscribers first before we go public with the video of that we took there in that. I'm calling it a museum, I think, or Nirvana. Maybe we should call it Nirvana.
Yeah, I would say Nirvana is appropriate.
So that's later in the show. And also thanks to Tom from Norway. He messaged us, as you guys know. We talked about this last month about the show sounding metallic and compressed. We discussed all that last month. I think we've fixed and addressed it. So we're now posting the show as the AAC or 4MA type. I just did it. We just decided that was the issue. The AAC is a larger file type. So there's more in the file than there is for MP3. I didn't get any complaints about the not having an MP3, so we're going to continue to create the AACM4A version. That'll be the official feed of the podcast. But if anybody needs an MP3 version for any reason, just let me know. I can create it for you upon request. Tom did tell me after we put the show out, he listened. He thought it sounded really good. It's great to hear. And I also reposted that show before to the AAC, and I should do that as many shows as I can. Go back and do the AACs, but so hopefully that overall file type has been addressed. Of course, the thing is that we talk so much. 2 hours, over 2 hours is like 200 megabytes of file size, whereas MP3 you would get it down to under 100 megabytes. So there's a significant file size, but megabytes it's not that bad anymore. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, and if we were still doing this with CDs, we'd be sending out 2 or 3 CDs a month for you guys to listen to all of this. So it's still a big step forward.
And I've also been talking with Greg out of NorCal Rovers. They're Northern California. We're going to, I think, get them on the show, set something up. And there's also a gentleman that I sent some stickers to out of the UK. I sent him stickers, and I can't find his contact info anymore. So please, sir, contact me, email me again. I think you contact me through Instagram, and I've lost how to find your contact info. So my apologies, sir. Please contact me again. I want to say his name's Steve, but I could be wrong. I didn't even, I usually do a better job of keeping track of these things, and that one I did. And now time for the news. JLR sales for September 2017, another bang-up job for the month of September. Overall, they were up 7%. I believe that is globally, and we got this information thanks to justbritish.com. So I'm going to ask the justbritish.com editor, is this global sales, or is this
I believe those figures are, yes. Normally we publish both global and North American, but I believe the ones you're referencing, because they refer to however it's in there, non-low country, non-local sales. Right. I believe that was the national figures.
Yeah. See, okay, you can leave the show now. I had you answer the question I need. I'm kidding.
Okay, goodbye.
Click. Retail sales in September were up 20% year on year. So that's same month, 2017 to 2016 for September. In China, they were up 20%. 17% in North America, 10% overseas markets, and 1% in Europe. And they were down, though, 4% in the UK specifically. Michael, do you know what overseas markets is? Is that, I guess that would that then be what, Australia?
The rest of all of us would refer to those as all other. So Mexico, wherever else. The interesting thing about those figures to me is, I think in an article that came out long after that, is auto production in the UK overall has fallen for the 5th month out of 6. Because the plants in the UK, even Nissan and everything else, they are falling. But sales for Jaguar Land Rover continue to go up, which is a good thing.
Is that part of the global the global shift of vehicle sales to SUVs and away from sedans, you think?
I think it's the market for Jaguar Land Rover vehicles, particularly. I would look at the other plants may make things such as Nissan Micras or whatever. The market that JLR has put itself in is less likely to be subject to the whims and fancies of the ups and downs.
Right, because they're shooting for a higher spec market.
Exactly.
That doesn't fluctuate as much for.
And as horrible in some ways as it may be, their production is smaller than some of these other people, so it's less volatile in a way. So as long as they can maintain some exclusivity, that pent-up demand, maybe they're going to be less susceptible to just the whims in the market of a normal car.
Very interesting. And do you think that, shooting for that sort of upper class market, especially in the UK, has any difference that, people want to buy something that's by and manufactured in the UK?
I think it definitely has it adds to the prestige. It adds to, the home market aspect of it. If you look at a certain type of person, whether it be here, the made in the USA person, or there, the made in the Britain person, I think it does have an effect to a certain extent. Now, a lot of modern cars, you don't know where they're made, no matter who the brand is. And, of course, even JLR is owned by an Indian company. But I think there is a certain amount of that.
So moving on, there was a interview with the CEO of JLR, whose name is Ralph Spaeth. We've talked about him before. This is with the Canadian newspaper Globe and Mail. And a lot of it, of course, was focused on Canada itself and how Land Rover Jaguar's involved in Canada. But there's some things here that apply globally and I think would be of interest to us all. Talking about how JLR kind of came back from having problems after the 2008 recession crash. We're going to talk about it. And Spaeth said that at the end of the day, I think we have to say thank you very much to Ratan Tata. He was very visionary, and of course, Ratan Tata was I think he was. I don't think he is anymore in charge of Tata, the global company that is the Tata Group. There we go. Yeah, he was. There we go. See, it's in the next paragraph. If I only read on, I wouldn't have to sound like a fool when I was reading that. I was saying that Tata was chairman of the Indian conglomerate Tata when subsidiary Tata Motors bought Jaguar and Land Rover from Ford in 2008. Just before the global recession, sales dropped, and it looked as if the company would move some manufacturing overseas from Britain. But as the economy bounced back, JLR sales picked up with the introduction of the XJ sedan and the revised Range Rovers. I guess it would be the Evoque. Spaeth elected to keep British factories open, recruiting 3,000 additional workers. So that's an interesting little fact there that's going to have been summed up how they could have easily have, when sales were dropping and a way to maintain profit margins, started to build elsewhere in cheaper countries where labor costs were cheaper, but they it was, I think, good for them to keep it in this, as you mentioned earlier, the home market.
Yeah, and I think there's one thing that we've covered in past episodes, and that is that he really wanted to keep JLR very much independent as its own, brand and, executive team as well. Just keep it as
right.
a subsidiary, really. Which helped immensely.
Well, I think certainly when they were doing well. If they hadn't done well, I think that might have changed. If they hadn't turned sales around, I think that would have been a different thought.
Agreed, but I think just from the beginning, he had the intention of keeping them separate and in the home market as much as he could. Whereas many companies will buy a brand and then immediately try to pull them in under their own processes and organization.
Right.
So it's interesting that he did from the start try to keep that separate, and so gave them that chance several times.
Right. Good. Yeah, it's a good point. Spaeth was asked about as things have gotten better, could JLR ever be as big as BMW? And he says, quote, "Big is not everything. We want to have profitable, sustainable growth, and we want to deliver something extra, something special. As long as our customers have fun and we deliver products with substance, this kind of design and desire, then I don't have any fear about Jaguar Land Rover." So it sounds like your independence that you were talking about from Tata, that's what it sounded like there. It also sounds like there's no pressure for them to get bigger from Tata itself. I guess sounds like they're happy with how things are going.
And I think this is my own personal philosophy, but I think there are not enough large corporations that do try to just shoot for that sustainability and not trying to, really get to the next level of sales and income and all of that.
In another article that was entitled, I love the title, Could Jaguar Land Rover Buy Ferrari? The Coventry Telegraph out of the UK talked to Mike Gold, who's an acclaimed author and has written a number of books on Land Rover and such things. Whether they are going to buy anybody, whether it's Ferrari or something, I was less concerned with that. The interesting thing that I took from this discussion in this article was how much money Tata has to do something, whether it's anything. They've got something like $6 billion. It is dollars. They have $6 billion that they can use, or as the author, Michael Gold said, $6 billion burning a hole in their corporate pocket. So they've got not just, and that's $6 billion is not all from JLR either. It's from their other ventures, but they've got a lot of money. So if they want to get bigger and buy Ferrari and go down that luxury route, they could. Or if they wanted to, as was even mentioned, one of the GM, was it Holden? One of those Holden's Australian, excuse me.
Yeah. Holden's gone now.
Holden's gone. But what's one of the European GM marks? I forget which one, and then everyone's probably going, it's this, I forget. We talked about it, but maybe buying them.
Was it Fiat or something like that?
No, Fiat's Chrysler.
Right.
Not Vauxhall. Michael, help me out here. You don't remember?
Yeah, don't look at me. I'm reaching too.
Anyway,
I'm still going back to the rumor of them buying Aston Martin. So,
well,
right.
There's another thing, right? So
there was Aston Martin and Ducati.
And it kind of goes back to the story before that about them not getting too large. Is I think as long as they can maintain their profitability growth is more than what they care about than how large they can be. And I think in American terms, we always think about, they have all this money in the bank, so it must be burning a hole in their pocket. But in a lot of ways, some foreign firms see having all that money as insurance against crises and against problems. So it may not be burning a hole in their pocket as much as some people think it is.
Right. And we've had I tend to, especially with the modern JLR, I tend to correlate it a lot with companies like Apple, because they're so design focused, so technology focused, and they're shooting for that sort of sustainability, not going for the biggest company, although that happens.
Well, if they become the biggest company, they become the Windows of the market, and they become the commodity, which is not what they want, because then they don't have the prestige anymore. They need to maintain the exclusivity, so there's a fine balance there for them.
Right, exactly. And, Apple is one of those companies that did have, massive amounts of money in their coffers. And a lot of the U.S. financial folks were saying, you got to spend that. You can't have that sitting around. But, it's not a bad thing to have.
So they built a building that looks like a spaceship instead.
Right.
That is a cool building.
It really is.
Cool. But also having all that money around allows Tata, Land Rover, Jaguar, all of that to invest into other areas that they are not necessarily good at, such as, especially these days, technology, autonomous driving. They're going to have to get into that. Electrification, as we'll talk about later, they're going to have to get into those areas. And having $6 billion sitting there, and they've already done this. They've already invested in some of these areas. So I'm not saying anything that is revolutionary, but it gives them that opportunity to invest in things that they're not already skilled in or good at, and want to quickly ramp up. Which is a lot of companies do that. That's what Google has done. That's what Apple has done. They're not good in something, they go buy that company.
I think it also gives them some insurance against what Brexit may or may not do, and until they see what that's going to totally do, they may not play their hand. It also gives them the power to hold sway a little bit and go to to the British government, well, we have this money burning a hole in our pocket, but depending on what you do with Brexit, we may or may not spend it here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Land Rover design boss wary over copycats. We've talked about this before, but it was a little more concrete, and now we see how Land Rover is reacting. You guys may recall that in China there was the Land Wind company, and they created the X7, which was a kind of a knockoff copycat of the Evoque. And so as a result, McGovern says that they're wary of showing new concepts because of such incidents. And of course, Land Rover's not the only one it's happened to. Apparently, another Chinese manufacturer, which I'm not going to even try to say their name, has previously been in headlines for ripping off the design of the Porsche Macan, the Tiguan, and the Smart for Two. So I think that's... the Defender concept came out. It was panned, and I think that's probably a reason why we've not seen another one. As we know, the design is done, and we've probably not seen it because I suspect, because they're worried about copycats and someone quickly coming out with something that takes their design.
Yeah, and I think, especially with Jerry at the forefront, he's really trying to push things on the design aspect. They still have the technology side that really pushes things in the vehicles. But since he's focusing really so much on design, that's the one thing you really can't, especially for markets like China, where they do tend to steal design because it's not stealing in their society, that they really want to hold those cards close.
I think it's you drew the correlation between them and Apple a few minutes ago, and I think it's very much the same way. Apple plays its cards very close to its chest on design so that people can't copy it, so that all the complaints can't come out ahead of time too. But for numerous reasons, they play them very close, and so they can get the big reveal.
Right. Yeah, going for that big reveal, having it be something new and surprising, and not just sort of waiting once it's been announced and maybe somebody else comes out with something similar for a reasonable price,
or
they're
even
both
beat
in
you
that
to
same
market.
market. Yeah.
Well, it's all about design these days, it seems, doesn't it?
Well, there are not as many differentiating factors amongst vehicles these days, especially as not everyone really is as passionate about driving specifically, right? Because at this point, most people can jump into any vehicle and drive it.
I actually had a Jaguar Land Rover dealer tell me that, yes, what Jaguar and Land Rovers are these days is jewelry, and that's all design.
Yep,
absolutely. Yeah. Well, that's a lot of tech is that way. Apple coming out with with a phone. It's a pocket computer. It looks nice and it feels right and it's intuitive to use. And you see a lot of that now in cars have become technology, and they're rolling technology. And whether they use gas or diesel or electric, there's still at the end it's transport. It's getting you somewhere, and they have become. And there's a lot of money to be made, certainly on that luxury end side of it. Have I put too many things together there in one sentence? I don't know.
I think they're all valid points, so no.
Yeah, okay. Hey. All right. Moving on to something specific here in North America. Well, actually, the U.S. on sales. And the article's entitled Turf Battle. Dealer's lawsuit says his territory is too big. And I'm going to focus less on that. Than I will on some other things that we learn as a result of this. There's a dealer down in Florida. I think it's around the Orlando area. And he is saying that they're not making enough money as Land Rover's doing very, very well. The dealership's having problems. And I think the interesting thing to learn out of this is how North America does business and how they make money and how much money they are making. Specifically, a dealer who meets JLR's business targets can receive payouts of up to 7% of the sticker price of all the vehicles the store sold in the previous quarter. The money is put into a bonus pool divided among dealers who meet their targets. And further along, to kind of rehash that, the increased sales are giving dealers overall for JLR. The increased sales are giving dealers a shot at sizable quarterly bonus payouts from the company's Business Builder Bonus Program, according to the manufacturer. Dealers receive bonuses by hitting sales targets on new and used vehicles, reaching service volume goals, having an approved facility plan, and keeping up with employee training needs. As they're doing well, there's money to be made, and how they're doing it. So sounds like there's sizable markup there, is what I'm reading. 7%, payouts of 7% based on total vehicle sales to in a pool. I think there's quite a bit of money there.
Yeah, and that's similar to how a number of high-end luxury retail industries work in terms of that sort of kickback bonus program, as well as having those requirements for sales and service and training facilities and all of that. Mm-hmm. So it's very interesting to get that peek and see how similar it really is to other luxury brands in terms of their retail strategy. And back to sort of the headline, it seems weird. Usually you don't have people complaining about them having too large a market, but if those sales are all getting pooled with other dealers who are meeting those requirements, they may be not getting the cut that they feel is fair for them.
Yeah, as you said, they have a larger territory. They say, where was it here, that there was a dealer that is closer to certain of their area, and they're like 200 miles away, whereas another dealer would be only 60 miles away from that customer. And so there's something going on there. I'm not sure what that is. And it certainly, you can read it in the article, but it's not completely clear to me, but it's interesting. Yeah, I thought the peek in, as you said, the peek into how things are priced and paid for is interesting.
Yeah, it could be an interesting bargaining chip if you
unless you know that when dealers say, "Oh, this car cost me X," and look at the invoice, again, as we all know, that's got nothing to do with what their final profit really is.
Right, absolutely.
And even used cars.
You get one of those dealers that you're going to tip them over into that next bonus pool.
Yes,
that's true. Yeah, they may, if you get the right time a month. Usually it's at the end of the month, and you knowing that. You shouldn't tell them this, of course, that you're going to, hey, I'll get you into the next bonus pool. They don't want to hear that, but well, maybe if you drop another couple grand or $5,000, then they know in their calculation that might put them into that bonus pool, so they'll take less now to anticipation getting more later. Yeah, negotiation.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting though.
Yeah. JLR to badge vehicles based on horsepower. So as the Autoblog says here, add the JLR to the list of automakers changing their nomenclature due to the realities of engine downsizing. So there will be a P, like P380 AWD. So the P will be for petrol, 380 is the engine's horsepower, D will be for diesel, and E will be for electric. And in hybrids, though, I think a hybrid might have a P at the beginning and an E at the end. We'll see some of that later in the show here when we talk about some specifics. But so they're adding that. All they're doing is adding it. So you're still going to have Range Rover, but you'll now have Range Rover, and then underneath of that will be a badge that says P400, something like that. So just it's out there, it's coming. I'm not sure.
And it's very interesting when I can't remember if it was the Velar or the previous Range Rover was announced. It must have been the Velar because that's around when they started doing this. I saw the P380 badge on one of the Velars, and I was like, wait, they can't be saying that this is the Velar. They're using, the code name for the Range Rover, and they're basically extending the P38 model number. That can't be right. And then I looked into it more and saw that it was based on the horsepower, but I had that little quick scare.
Yeah. Right. Yes. Oh, yeah. I've been just for fun, I've been looking at older Land Rovers, and I see the P38 and I'm like, oh, that's a good price. Oh, it's a P38.
Does that mean you can just get a horsepower boost by changing the numbers on the back of your car?
That's correct. That's right.
I'll just buy different numbers and put them on there.
Mm-hmm. Just knock
go
them
to your local hardware store and pick up some extra numbers and stick them on, and you're good to go.
Although, isn't that better than what BMW has been doing lately? Haven't they been using fake numbers? Like it doesn't match up because they used to do. I forget how their system was, but now it's like off. Like it in the the 325. Was it the 325 meant it was a 3 Series and the 25 was 2.5 liter or something, and now that doesn't matter anymore?
They started going with, I think, random number generators.
Yeah. Right.
That's too bad. It's hard because these days, part of the reason the JLR is doing this is because horsepowers are often not going up as much as they used to.
I know this is going to sound heretical, but I really don't care. I like cars with names. I like the Rolls Royce. At least what they used to say about Rolls Royce. It's sufficient. I guess.
It sounds like the old thing with the going to LR2 and 3 and 4 because Americans prefer numbers and then back and forth, and it's like just produce a good car and be done with it.
Well,
right.
And that was the thing, though. That was not true. They did that because Discovery had such a horrible name for reliability in the U.S. That was the real reason, not because Americans like numbers. I disagree with that. Anyway, Land Rover announces new 4-cylinder engines for Discovery Sport and the Evoque. So they are going to have 2 new engines, and one is the most horsepower ever seen in the Disco Sport of the Evoque at 286 horsepower. This is U.S. only, I might add, or maybe North America only. They're also going to have a 237 horsepower version. But here's the interesting thing. The new all-aluminum engine has a twin-scroll turbocharger, and the turbocharger in the higher 286 horsepower variant is ball bearing. And both engines are going to have a cylinder head is one piece connected to the exhaust manifold, which is a first for JLR. So I think that's the interesting thing coming out of that article.
Yeah, and I think in a previous episode a number of months ago, we briefly discussed that sort of single head piece where it's the exhaust manifold and the head all in one additional small top block. That probably makes manufacturing a little easier, and it certainly helps them conserve space in the engine bay to keep these engines smaller.
And apparently it's going to shorten warm-up time, improve efficiency, and reduce emissions. I also suspect it will increase the repair cost.
I think so. No longer are you going to get either a head or exhaust manifolds. You're going to buy both at once. That's sort of the way things go, but I understand the reducing warm-up time and all of that because, again, you don't have just air sitting around your exhaust manifolds. It's mostly in the head there.
Any idea what the twin scroll turbocharger is? Is that instead of one propeller spinning, there's 2? Is that what that means? Any idea? That one I'm not familiar with.
I actually had to look that one up, and that one is also an interesting technological improvement. Apparently, it's somewhat common in aftermarket upgrades and performance vehicles. So a standard turbo that we think of, especially what Land Rover has used, is considered a single scroll. So it's running at a single pressure the entire time. But with the twin scroll, what they're doing is basically it has 2 different pulse pressures instead of trying to maintain a single pressure. And the reason for that is because certainly with a 4-cylinder, you have a certain firing order on the cylinders. So with that firing order, you have one exhaust outlet which is going at a full pressure, while the other ones are closed or partially closed. So they're trying to maintain that pressure through a turbo that way. With the twin scroll, they're trying to pair the ones that are firing at the same time and handling it in 2 slightly more efficient pulses through the turbo system.
So it might be continuous versus being pulsed. That might be more.
Yeah, so the standard one is more of a continuous. It's not as efficient because you're getting a pulse boost or you're getting exhaust pressure from one cylinder, but another one might be closed at that time, and so you're not getting as much pressure as you really should, even though they're trying to keep it consistent. Whereas with the new twin scroll, they're really trying to optimize and get the boost from these 2 that are open close to each other, and not from the other 2 that are closed at the other time. Apparently, they're slightly less reliable, but that much more efficient and provide that much more power because you're really getting the peak boost or peak power out of the exhaust at those firing times.
Maybe that's why they mentioned that the one is the higher horsepower engine has ball bearings. Maybe that has to do with the reliability.
Yeah, definitely.
Interesting. Well, unfortunately, Harold couldn't join us because it sounds like a good question for him to address. Maybe we'll have to bring that up with him next time if he's able to join us.
I would love to hear his take on that and see if I'm really understanding that correctly.
Yeah, exactly. Harold, where are you? I mean, he was supposed to join us today on the show, but unfortunately, at recording time, he was not available. So that is those are U.S. and those are gasoline engines, but Land Rover is still committed to diesel engines, and so much so that they've invested almost £1 billion in that Ingenium series of diesel engines and, of course, petrol engines, and in the plant in the UK. And from this article I'm reading now here, find out one of the reasons why is that there's a EU regulation on CO2 coming. It's 2 years away that premium manufacturers without small cars and engines have no chance of meeting a fleet average without a high proportion of diesels to add to their BEVs, which is battery electric vehicle, and PHEVs, which is their plug-in hybrid vehicles. So that's what we've heard over the last couple of months, that they're committed to diesel, and I think we now know a little more why, is to meet CO2 regulations. And also I think now we see why these engines are getting smaller also, and why they've invested so much in that Ingenium series.
Yeah, I think there's a lot related to those regulations, and obviously the other side of it is that as they make Land Rovers lighter and more aerodynamic, they don't actually need as powerful engines, so you can get a Discovery Sport and get away with a 4-cylinder in there.
Not in the U.S., mind you. This is I want to bring up. Why is there not a diesel in a diesel Discovery Sport available in the U.S. yet?
That's a good question. I don't know. I haven't paid enough attention to see whether the Ingenium diesels are EPA spec'd for the U.S. yet.
I would think they would have. Maybe that's the reason. Their other engines are there's a diesel Range Rover Sport. They're available here. Maybe it is that Ingenium engine isn't completely U.S. spec'd yet. You think it would be?
Yeah, because I think those other diesels are not the Ingeniums, so they may not. I could be wrong, but they may just not have EPA spec'd that yet. So hopefully they'll be coming in the next couple of years or something as they get approval for the Ingenium engines across the line.
And that's the only reason I haven't bought a new Disco Sport. Not really, but that's what I keep telling myself. If there was a Disco Sport that was diesel, I would be, and especially when I was thinking of what to do with my Jetta TDI, what to do with that, which I decided eventually I'm keeping it. But there was a thought that if they had the Disco Sport in a diesel, I would have done the trade-in and upgraded to that. But
yeah, that would have been a nice upgrade.
So moving on to electric vehicles, JLR is embracing electric. Well, that's what this article says. They have to, as we've learned in the past. There's a number of countries now. What are we up to? 6? One of the few things we've done with research is keeping track of the countries and states even that are considering or have enacted that they will eliminate internal combustion engines. The UK, Norway, Germany, I think California is considering it. But Land Rover is certainly, as everybody does, is looking at electric. But this article says that other manufacturers are developing 48-volt electrical architectures as a low-cost solution for powering turbochargers, accessories, steering, start-stop systems, and more. JLR hasn't confirmed that yet. Their engineers are pursuing electrical components that can be shared, though, between Jaguar and Land Rover, and are capable of being tuned and adapted to reinforce each other's brand identity. So and that's also, I think, didn't they invest in a company that it was a technology company, not an electrical company. But so they're out there. They're working on the electrics and the electrical engines, and as we know, they're coming out. It's our next article. No, it's not the next article. Coming up. No. Yeah. Coming up. We'll tell you in a few minutes. Stay tuned for the plug-in electric Range Rover. We'll talk more about that. First, we're going to talk about, though, because this is the story lineup we had. I'm making pains to say this correctly. The new Road Rover model to launch in 2019. This is a Land Rover model called the Road Rover. Is supposed to come out with as an electric-powered Jaguar XJ size luxury vehicle. The first Road Rover is understood to be a Mercedes-Benz S-Class rival in terms of outright luxury, interior craftsmanship, but with some all-terrain capability. I did air quotes. The car will also be tuned for impressive on-road dynamic performance, taking advantage of the potential delivered by electric motors. Hard details about their plans of the new model are very limited, and tight security around the project has enabled them to progress for 2 years before launch without anything becoming public about it. So there is one last thing I highlighted here. JLR bosses have clearly concluded that in order to meet the million vehicle target, they want to sell for the whole JLR, want to sell 1 million vehicles. They're currently at about 500,000. They need to continue to exploit the huge market shift towards crossovers and SUVs, and also hedging their bets by building in premium vehicles that are more fuel efficient and less having trouble reading. I was so worried about Road Rover that I can't read the regular words. They are building premium vehicles that are more fuel efficient and less like conventional off-roaders. So the Road Rover is coming.
I am also impressed that they were able to keep this under wraps for so long. So it's essentially, a luxury crossover, performance crossover, which will help with, what we just talked about with the, fuel efficiencies that, they have to balance the fuel efficiency, the fuel type, and all of that across their production lines.
Fleet size also.
Various numbers for fleet sizes, yeah.
And fleet averages on emissions and fleet averages on fuel economy. Sorry to interrupt you there, but I think those will play into this too.
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. And
also,
they already have the SUV market. That's all they cater to. So unlike, Harold is upset about Jaguar producing SUVs. This is
I was just thinking that. I want to know Harold's opinion on this.
I think we know Harold's opinion.
Yeah. But I think this one makes more sense than Jaguar jumping right to an SUV.
Really?
Land Rover
Does it?
Going to a crossover makes a little more sense.
I disagree with you.
But it's better than Land Rover jumping right to a sports car, right? A sports sedan.
Yes, but right. Okay. All right. I see your point there. That probably makes some more sense. Well, really? Maybe not.
I would have expected.
But I don't see the
Jaguar as a smarter.
Yeah, but the F-Pace to me is a crossover. It's not a real SUV. It's more of a crossover. They did the half step. This is if you think this is a half step, then I would say the F-Pace is a half step.
I mean, this actually reminds me everything I've sort of heard about this as being very similar to an F-Pace, except for more upmarket.
Yep.
I mean, every description puts it in the same size category, the same capability. I mean, it seems to me that the F-Pace and this new Road Rover are going to be competing directly against each other.
I think they're based off of
That's true. Now, it'll be interesting. This, I assume, has to be the same platform as the F-Pace and the new Velar.
That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, which Land Rover, Jerry was like, oh, no, we actually came up with the platform first and just let Jaguar produce the F-Pace first. So, yeah, I don't know. It's definitely a weird situation, but I understand what they have to do for the various governments and the bean counters and all of that.
I suspect this has to do.
It's a little weird.
I think this has to do with two things. This is how I see it. One, you have a global downturn on selling of sedans and traditional cars. People want the SUV crossover, whatever you want to call it. That's that more truck-based car things. There's that, and the other thing is Land Rover is very good, especially as we've seen with the Velar and the Evoque, even of exploiting a little niche in the market that no one knew was there, and going in and putting a car in that slot, and slot cars. Thank you. Sorry, I amused myself on that one. So I think that's the other thing, is that they found these little niches, and I think they're not going to sell 1 million of them. It's not going to be like a Camaro or something like that, but they're going to sell enough that's going to, and since it's based off an existing frame, it's not much to change the exterior that much and change and have a similar. It'll have the same interior to all the other vehicles, so there's not much there that I think it's a variant.
I'm sure Jerry would beg to differ.
I'm sure he would.
Yeah, what I've read said that it's that the XJ replacement, that this is going to be sort of lockstep with it, like they have based in the Velar and all that. So, I mean, unless they do a market segment difference and make this much more luxury, this and the Jaguar XJ, whatever it will be, seem to be right at each other.
Yep.
Yeah, the more I look at it now, I'm starting to agree more. And the interesting
We've
thing
changed
is
his mind.
No, you guys are persuasive. But it's interesting. It's not so much that this isn't a market that or a niche that we didn't know about, right? It's just one that we never really expected Land Rover to go into.
I just want to know when Land Rover is going to make a station wagon.
This is getting pretty close.
I was hoping you'd laugh at that one more. Sorry. That just seems...
Do you want the fake wood paneling on the side too?
Absolutely. What do we think I drive right now? I drive a station wagon. That's what it is. You know, I think to me, the station wagon to me is the perfect form for a vehicle because it's usually fit 4 or 5 people. You can fit stuff in the back. It's low to the ground, which is good for speed and handling. That just to me is a perfect form.
Now you just brought it full circle back to what the original Road Rover was supposed to be.
Right.
There you go.
50, 60 years ago.
Yeah, and speaking of that, so that the Road Rover was an original concept vehicle or project, actually. I don't think they actually ended up building one, really. That's sort of what the Range Rover project came out of. So they started this project to make something that was as comfortable as a saloon car. So, a standard, sedan / station wagon with the off-road capability of a Land Rover, because at the time it was all series vehicles. So they were not particularly comfortable, but very capable. And they started down that project with the Road Rover and then eventually just started on the Range Rover and made a much more comfortable and much more capable off-road vehicle and sort of dove into the SUV market instead of shooting for that sort of what we now think of as a station wagon or would have become a crossover. So it's interesting that they have been digging into that past for the naming of the Velar and now the Road Rover and really sort of dredging up that past, but giving it a nice futuristic look.
I just hope they don't use the name Road Rover.
Oh, they're probably going to. I didn't think they would use Velar.
No, Velar makes more sense to me.
As long as they don't do Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner Road Rover commercials, then I can probably get by with the Road Rover name.
Let's move on to another model that we know and love, the Defender. So Land Rover design chief dangles more clues on the next Defender. So Mr. McGovern, the Land Rover's design head, was at a Range Rover Velar reveal event for journalists, I believe in California. And then folks asked him about the new Defender, and he said, I smiled at. He smiled, and I smiled at this too. That didn't take long, about 3 minutes before he got questions. Anyway, let's talk some of the things they summarized here. First and most important, McGovern said the design work is complete. Now it is the job of Land Rover engineers to take McGovern's vision for the next Defender and make sure it lives up to and perhaps exceeds the original. Land Rover says Land Rover engineers are quote unquote hell bent on doing just that. More clues came in the presentation to reporters. McGovern describes the Land Rover as having 3 members, or I think they called them families before, Range Rover, Discovery, and Defender. He lists the traits that each must have to be true to its original mission and to succeed today. For the Defender, these boxes are ticked: design leadership, durability, and engineering integrity. McGovern says he's a modernist and he's looking forward, not back. Yeah, so those are the 3 pillars there. Well, there's the 3 families, and there's the I know they didn't say what the other families' traits are, but Defender's design leadership, durability, and engineering integrity. Design leadership, you can see why they haven't probably revealed it yet. Author of this article went on to say, as this shows, I think the next Defender will evolve. It will have boxy fenders. Look for fresh edges and curves that smooth out the crude. He didn't explain what crude meant. Utilitarian traits of the old. I stopped at the comma, and curves that smooth out the crude utilitarian traits of the old version, which personally I like. I'd wager that the next Defender will have flat sides, but look for an interesting flourish that draws the eye from the front of the vehicle to the rear. Doesn't already have that with the little bump out? The taillights will be modern, but you'll recognize the shape. The headlights will likely be round like the originals, but look for some interesting lighting, either from LEDs or some new light source. What else would there be besides LEDs? And
they're going to put another sun in orbit.
McGovern says there will be a family of Defenders, which we assumed was going to be the case. There's going to be basically a D90, a 110, a pickup, probably an extended wheelbase version, and the pickup version though would not be available in the U.S. Because what the U.S. has a tax rate on kind of a protectionist tariff, as I see it, 25% on imported trucks. So I think that would stop that from coming here. I wonder if my question on that aspect of it, are they going to have just a cab version, to have that utilitarian stuff going on behind it?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. It seems unlikely that they would do that.
So that's new Defender info. Any thoughts, gentlemen, on I know we talk about this a lot, and it's near and dear to our heart. Actually, we should ask Michael. What any thoughts you have, Michael, on
I'm
new Defender?
Really interested to see what they come up with, because he's been so set, McGovern has, on non-retro, but unless it does retro to some extent, nobody's going to call it a Defender. I'm really hoping, and I've talked to a few people about this, if they were to do what some prototypes and what a couple of other companies have looked at and put a separate electric motor at each wheel, they could do a whole lot with it. They could fill a lot of their electric potential. They could make a very utilitarian vehicle, and it could be real interesting. I have no idea if they will. That's just a hope. So we'll just have to wait and see.
I suspect you're going to see a petrol, diesel, and electric and hybrid versions of it. It certainly seems to be the case. But yeah,
I'm not so sure we'll even see a petrol version. I mean, I could be totally wrong. The way they're heading, the way regulations, when you look at that the UK has specified no petrol versions after a certain date, and other places where I would not even totally be surprised to see them not have a petrol version at all.
Yeah, and especially since, I'm not sure, but this has slipped, the new Defender itself has slipped long enough that, Jerry says now that the design is finalized, and I think he said that for a little while now, and he's saying it's up to the engineers. But this has already slipped so long that we're getting into that territory of this is going to launch when some of those restrictions are right around the corner, or maybe in some cases upon us.
Right. And if we go back to what we were, again, I hate to go back to that in a way, talk about what Apple does with design, where they go, you're not going to like this, but we're going to just rip this apart entirely and take your CD out of your laptop or whatever.
Headphone
I would
jack,
not be surprised
to
see, okay, McGovern, I'm going to make my mark on the world by making this new Defender not have a gas version.
Yeah, and especially if you're going for that sort of slightly more utilitarian, more reliable, but still good performance.
But I'm going to interrupt you. But one of the traits was supposed to be durability and engineering integrity. And one of the things that people are going to expect out of this Defender is it's going to be able to go off road. And I don't know that battery technology is at the stage where it can take sustained ability to be off-road in the desert, underwater, long time in the cold. If they're still going to go down that path, and it's going to be this, unstoppable, the best vehicle ever made to go anywhere and everywhere. If that's still going to be their mantra, or mantra, I guess, that we think they're going to want to go down, I don't think batteries are there yet. I don't know that we're at that stage yet. So I think you're going to need to have a gasoline and a diesel. Now, maybe there won't be. They're obviously not going to be able to sell internal combustion engines in some of these countries within like 2025, I think is the earliest. But I think you're going to have it.
It could be that they jump right into hybrids or something like that, where they're actually, instead of doing a traditional petrol engine,
can we have our
drivetrain where you're adding electric assistance, they could reverse it and have an electric drivetrain with petrol
fall back to
assistance,
petrol,
Diesel.
which is more like a Chevy Volt or something like that. So it'll be very interesting to see what it looks like. It's one of those things. There was so much controversy over this horse that we've beaten to death for years now, of that initial concept and how disliked it was mostly across the board. That if they can get to a point where compared to like Toyota with the FJ series, and they came out with the FJ Cruiser, and it looked quite a bit not like the previous models, but it did maintain a lot of the design elements, that would be reasonably well received, whereas the previous concepts they released were not really that remotely close to the original.
I am so sure that Jerry McGovern wants to put his mark so firmly that I'm not going to put anything past him. I wouldn't be surprised to see a totally plastic-bodied electric vehicle. I mean,
It's true.
Well, let's move on, shall we, to brand new vehicles that are actually concrete. The 2018 Range Rover is coming out. I know there's a lot. This came out, and this is where I have a lot of things in my head to say. I'm sorry, that's why I'm laughing. There's just so much to say about it. And it's interesting. It's a hybrid. So there's going to be a hybrid Range Rover. It's going to be badged, as we talked about earlier, with that P400 business. And so it's going to be a P400E. It's going to have a 398 horsepower turbocharged 4-cylinder hybrid drivetrain. And they claim that they're going to get 31-mile range on electric only. So does that mean it's an electric vehicle that is supplemented by the engine, or is it actually getting power from the engine also?
Since this is a plug-in hybrid, it's basically electric only with supplementation from
so it's
the petrol somehow. Now,
so it's a generator.
There's a couple of ways you could do it. Oh, so they could be actually having everything powered by the electric drivetrain, and the petrol generates electricity for that, whether it's petrol or diesel. They could be doing something like a more traditional hybrid where you have some kind of helper motor that provides additional power to the same drivetrain that's connected to the petrol or diesel engine, but implementing it in such a way that you can turn off the petrol engine and just still run from the electric engine in that sort of inline in the drivetrain. So I'm curious to hear how they're actually doing it.
It's not. I read this article a couple of times. It's not clear to me, but they obviously have other variants too, because when you look at the pricing.
They have a lot of options.
They do. I mean, the base SE V6, which I assume is gasoline based on what I'm reading here, is $87,000 American. They have the SE TD6 diesel, of course, is $89,000, and we move all the way to the top. Have you looked at the price yet, or am I going to reveal this to you live on air?
I have, but I think we should at least say the supercharged numbers in between.
Okay, sure.
Just to maybe not scare everybody quite so much.
So the supercharged V8 gasoline, $105,000. Add another $3,000 for the long wheelbase. The autobiography V8, $142,000. Add another $6,000 for the long wheelbase.
Now we might as well just jump to the top.
We are going to do that.
Because we're at 150.
The special vehicle autobiography. The special vehicle autobiography long wheelbase. V8, 557 horsepower, $207,900 American.
Yeah, that's crazy.
That's
I'm sure it's awesome and comfortable, but that's crazy.
It better be awesome and comfortable. Well, that's Range Rover territory. It does have executive seating. There's something like 24-way power adjustment, heated armrests, cooled everything. Here it is: cooled cushions, heated armrests, and calf and foot rests. There's a couple.
I've never even imagined having my calves be comfortable on a long trip while riding in
the
back of a Range Rover.
See, exactly. I suspect it's the back, because when you look at the video, and I highly recommend you check out, there's a couple videos they have, and I'll have them on the website, links to them. It looks like the rear seats recline, and that's the executive thing, I believe, and it's like, and it almost looks like they cradle you. And they use the word cradle. It cradles you, and I think that's where the calves get heated. So
yes.
There's also
and I have you didn't get to see it when we visited Jim, which people will hear the interview coming up, but I've looked in his autobiography long wheelbase, the current top of the line Range Rover, and it is very impressive and comfortable, but this does look to be another level beyond that.
Yeah, they certainly up their game. There were some other details about it, and I'm trying to find those as we were talking here. Oh, the glass, the side glass for the windows is 20% thicker. It is now 6 millimeters thick. This helps cut down on road noise. They've done something with the air ionizer. The sunroof cover is gesture control.
And the dash looks like the Velar at this point.
Well,
or very close to it.
I think I think it's the same dash. It's I believe there's 2 screens in the center dash. They're about the same size, and I guess if the nav's on in the top, then the lower one becomes the controls, and otherwise the controls go up to the top screen. There's a screen for where the gauges are, and the full display. I want to say it's 10 inches there, maybe 12 inches, and then there's another screen for the heads-up display. So the thing actually has 4 screens for the front cockpit, and I believe there's 2 screens in the back, of course, for entertainment in the executive seating.
Yes, There's one thing I noticed in the photos that I'm not sure if the current one has it. Maybe it does, but along the edges in the cargo area, what we would call the trunk, they would call the boot in the UK. There are some of those aluminum tracks for tying gear down, heavy gear, that are just built in, and it looks excellent.
It's about time, right?
Yeah.
Maybe
that's already there, but this is the first time I've noticed it in the new photos, and it was very well integrated. Makes it look like you could tie down some really heavy equipment back there, but I don't know that that's what I would drive around in my autobiography edition Range Rover.
The plug-in model, hybrid model, will be available as a 2019 model. An electric motor mates to 296 horsepower, 2-liter inline 4 for 398 horsepower output and 472 pound-feet of torque. 31 miles on battery alone. It can hit 60 at 6.4 seconds and a max speed of 137 miles per hour. That tells me that it's not that the engine is the internal combustion engine is not a generator. That it's actually somehow it's also connected to the transmission. That's at least the way I read that.
Yeah, that certainly sounds like it. So that's probably, what I described, where the electric motor is probably inline in the drivetrain, but they're able to, usually that's just a helper. But in this case, it sounds like you can run it for those 31 miles with the main engine off, and it's just turning the drivetrain directly, which, 31 miles to not use any gas in a Land Rover while you're driving around town through traffic and stuff like that.
In a big ass
can't complain
Range
about
Rover.
that.
In a big ass Range Rover, the full size. Come on,
that's true. Yeah.
I mean, that's 31 miles would be almost round trip when I worked in downtown Pittsburgh. I mean, it was 34 miles round trip for me, so that would be pretty good.
And honestly, in a situation like that, since it's a plug-in hybrid, you'd probably show up, plug it in, and
top it off,
drive home, and then you would still have a good half of that left, probably.
Right. I recommend you go to our website, and then there's a link to the new Range Rover refinement video. It's 4 minutes, 52 seconds. I recommend you watch that. It's a Land Rover produced, but it tells you it reviews all the things we talked about. That's where we got all our info pretty much from, about the seats and the glass and the ionization. It's pretty interesting to see. So that's main Land Rover, new Land Rover content news this month. We're going to go on some general things. Here in the U.S., the U.S. Senate has dropped trucks from the self-driving bill that's working its way through Congress. Self-driving is interesting, and it's relevant to what we like, and so that's why we're following this here. So lawmakers in the U.S. Senate have dropped self-driving trucks from legislation that would allow automakers to operate thousands of autonomous cars per year on U.S. roads. The action came after a high-profile campaign from labor unions to protect the jobs of professional drivers. So this goes on to say, the plan is, and then this is only in the Senate, still have to go to the House and be, of course, approved by the president, signed by the president. The Senate's self-driving measure would allow the Secretary of Transportation to grant exemptions to federal motor vehicle rules that require cars to have human operators. Actually, I didn't know we had that requirement, but turns out we do. Initially, 50,000 cars per automaker could be operated if companies can prove they meet existing safety standards for traditional cars. After 12 months, the number of exemptions per manufacturer would increase to 75,000, and it would go up to 100,000 in the third year. So that's the current plan anyways. Of course, the trucking companies weren't too happy about that because and I'm kind of surprised, to be honest. I thought the truck companies have a little more interest and a little more pull to get that in there, because I thought that would be the first wave for self-driving than I thought cars would.
Yeah, it seems like it would make more sense for something that is more of a service that runs in certain driving patterns, that it would be a little easier to implement.
And also for
in addition to everything else, but also for safety, there's already a lot of rules and regulations trying to keep truck drivers safe, because they have long days behind the wheel.
Oh, yeah.
We've all been there.
Oh, absolutely. There's requirements how long they can drive. And not to mention, a lot of them, this is a guess of my part, but even just their actual physical health, because they sit all day and they're eating probably bad food, they're not in the best shape, unfortunately. So there's also that their personal medical health and wellness would be good for that.
Yeah, but of course I completely understand that if that's your job, what are you going to do if suddenly that job gets pulled out from under you?
Right, because we certainly haven't planned how to adjust to the new world yet.
Right.
Anyway.
But that one more thing. I know we're trying to get through the news and have you guys listen to a reasonable length episode. But the other part is this really is only changing whether a driver is required to be in the vehicle, not whether the vehicle is automated. So
good point.
I guess with them taking this exemption out for trucking companies, those people can maintain their jobs, and the vehicles may still be automated for the most part, but they just have to have a human driver in there who's ready to intervene, which, for this generation of vehicles, that's not I think
it might
that
be a good
sense.
thing. Actually, and it could be a very good thing. It could be a good transition, though. Since you bring that up, it could be a good transition technologically and job-wise, because if you do it in that fashion, maybe the automation takes place on the highway, and then because it's typically a little more difficult, in smaller quarters and maybe around town, or docking the vehicle to unload it. Maybe that's where the driver comes into play. But when it gets on the highway, they can go into I'll assume it's a he, can go into autonomous mode. It drives. They're there. They have to pay attention, but but they're maybe less fatigued having to do the actual driving part. So it could be a good transition technologically, and for that.
Yeah, it might make that a less stressful, healthier, safer job.
Yeah.
And safer for everybody else. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out.
As folks know, I visited Morgan on the way up to Quebec. I visited some friends up there, and I learned something that I didn't know about, and I thought I'd pass it along. Right-hand drive vehicles are prohibited with exception in Quebec, the province of Quebec in Canada. So in Quebec, I'm looking at the society, what is this here? The Society for Assurance Automobile in Quebec. So, of course, that's in French, and I'm translating. In Quebec, right-hand drive vehicles built less than 25 years ago may not be operated on public roads with some exceptions, such as Canada Post vehicles, mail trucks. They have to get an exception. And it turns out and this came up, of course, with my 110. When I drive around the country and drive around the continent, someone's like, "Oh, you can't come into Quebec," and they're like, "Oh, really?" And so I looked it up, and I can, because there's a right-hand drive vehicle authorized for operation in Quebec. Any vehicle registered outside of Quebec, so a visiting vehicle, that would be mine. Vehicles built 25 years or more. Vehicles purchased before April 29th of 2009. I have no idea. Heavy vehicle and tool vehicle, or vehicle making frequent stops along the route for purposes of public service. So I guess that would be, that's the mail carriers and such things. And vehicles belonging to a driving school. So they're expensive. It's something to be aware of if you're going around I don't know, if you live in Quebec, I guess. I don't know. I don't understand that, really. It makes no sense to me. Why would you make a specific exception for that?
They say that there's 30% more accidents with right-hand drive vehicles because everything is set up for left-hand drive vehicles.
But how many right-hand drive vehicles do they have that their residents are actually purchasing? It seemed weird to me.
Well, I think they do have shorter import periods than we do here in the U.S., and they probably got a lot more vehicles that qualified, right. UK vehicles that qualified as safe, meeting their other standards in Quebec or in Canada, and this might be a Quebec only thing. I don't even know how the other provinces work.
Yeah, I didn't do any more research. I'm sorry. We are the only Land Rover podcast on the planet. That continues to be true, but I don't know if I might need to add the word non-fiction in there, because Land Rover has launched Discovery Adventure podcast series. It's a fictional podcast that includes a discovery. It's part of one of the participants is a discovery in a variety of famous locations across the UK, including a natural history museum. So if you want to go out and listen to the podcast, we'll have a link to the story, which goes out to Atlantic British and Rover Parts. Then you can, if you want to check that out.
Yeah, it sounds like an auditory extension, or obviously maybe not the same story, but an extension, a continuation of their, they did some ebooks
that's right.
a year or two ago.
Yeah, that author wrote something.
Yeah, sponsored by Land Rover, but had I think that was a Defender in it, where the guy camped out in Wales.
Right.
So interesting to have them, supporting people who are doing artistic projects like writing or doing, these sort of podcast stories.
I still say we're the only Land Rover podcast on the planet. I'm not changing the tagline.
Yeah, this one is not about the Land Rover. It plays a part just like the previous story. It'll be interesting to go listen to, but it's not about Land Rovers.
And we've talked about Jaguar Land Rover Classic Works, and I found that there's a video they published October 13th of this year. It's the video of the Classic Works facility. It's a 1 minute, 37 seconds. It's an ad basically for it. You can go visit and tour, and this, I guess, is the ad for that. And it's amazing how immaculate that facility is, but it's really cool too to see all the vehicles that they have there. I mean, it's there's a G4 in the background, and there's a Disco 2, and I saw for the very first Range Rovers there, a lot of Jaguars, which I unfortunately don't know all the different types of Jaguars there are, but it was a really cool video. It's 1 minute and 37 seconds of just it's beautiful. It's very beautiful.
And for those of us who would love to go visit, it's, 1.5 minutes of torture, but
I guess I didn't think of it that way.
Torture.
Wonderful torture. If we didn't already have a show title, that would be wonderful torture.
Exactly.
And finally, and this circles back to our very first guest we had on the show, but you may have seen this on the news. The BBC had this story. Land Rover marooned on Ascension Island, rescued and fixed. So the Oxford truck from the Oxford to Cambridge trucks that did the very first overland, and it was what it was called, the first overland. And you may the Oxford truck has been on Ascension Island and has finally been retrieved from Ascension Island and brought back to the UK. We assume for some sort of retrofit or rebuild, not by Land Rover, mind you. At least not that I could tell. Looks like it was done by just a regular civilian, and brought it back. But
yeah, I believe his name was Adam Bennett, and he brought it back and got the engine running. So at least it's running, even though it's in a little rusty condition. The photos, it's not clear what it's like underneath.
It's good patina.
Yeah, and I can't remember specifically, but I believe that the other vehicle, Cambridge made it back and has been restored and is out there, if I understand correctly. So this now both are back, I think.
Well, maybe
or am I misremembering that?
They said in the video that Cambridge was lost, but maybe you're right. I'm trying to remember now. I course didn't.
I could have been seeing a replica.
Yes, no one's ever done that. No one's ever made a replica of a Land Rover.
Right. Yeah. Never.
Well, our very first guest on the show was Graham Aldis, who did the first Overland, and that was the video he did of the first Overland, which is the Oxford and Cambridge trucks doing their trip in 1955. So we've kind of come full circle in a way. Maybe it's time to talk to Graham, get him back on the show, and get a little update. Now that
yeah, I think we should. And just to clarify, he didn't do the original video. One of the guys on the trip did the original filming, sent the footage back to the BBC, and they sort of stitched it all together and had David Attenborough, narrating as they do. And that footage was eventually all lost, and he helped recover it and then re-edit the footage. Unfortunately, all the sound was lost, but he was able to recover it and reproduce the original footage from the BBC airings.
So that's the news for October 2017. We will back in just a moment, and we're going to talk at more at length with two guests, Michael Carnell with Just British Motoring Online Magazine, and Jim Macri of Land Rover Nirvana in North America. Welcome back to the Centresteer Podcast, show number 55. You've heard Michael on talking about the news. Now let's get to know the man, the myth, the editor of Just British Online Motoring Magazine, Myth. See what I did there? It's Michael Carnell. Welcome, Michael.
Hey, how are y'all doing?
Fantastic. Thanks for joining us on the show today, and we appreciate your insights on the news and Land Rover stuff. But you do more than Land Rovers. You talk all about British cars. So tell us a little bit about the Just British magazine. Just
British is an online-only magazine for British cars of all types and all ages, everything from Land Rovers to sports cars to Jaguars, Triumphs, MGs, Austin Healey's, whatever, of all ages. Basically, picture it as a single source online magazine for everything British automotive.
And also something I just learned, you were showing us before the show began, you went to a local show, and you told me about a new vehicle I had never heard of before. Is it called the Champion?
The Austin Champ, yes. So I was at the local British Car Club show in Charleston yesterday, and there was a gentleman there who was actually the official tea taster and tea mixer for the Charleston Tea Plantation, which is the only operating tea plantation still left in the United States. But he brought an Austin Champ, which looks a lot like a Land Rover, a little more rounded. This was a 1952. It has a large Rolls-Royce engine in it and made by Austin. It was one of Land Rover's competitors. But, of course, with a Rolls-Royce power plant made by Austin, it couldn't compete financially when the British government went out for bids for their vehicles. So Land Rover took the market. But it was a quite unique vehicle.
Do you know how many were made?
I have no idea, actually. The more common variety is an Austin Champ, which is about the size of the Jeeps of the period. This is a little bit larger, but there are not many, and there were never any officially imported into the United States, so they're all right-hand drive.
Sweet.
It really is. He told me the story when he was apprenticing in London years ago to learn his trade. He had driven one because back then they were just cheap castaway vehicles. So he had bought it, as a student for like 75 pounds or something. And as he said, drove the wheels off of it until he had so many tickets from the police and for various infractions that he just abandoned it by the side of the road and never knew what became of it. But he'd always wanted another one and found this one not too long ago, I believe in Michigan or Minnesota or whatever, and brought it down to South Carolina.
Yeah, it's a nice looking vehicle. It's really cool. You can definitely see the Land Rover connections there. And it looks like a Jeep. It has that straight sides and
a couple things that you don't notice right off. Well, one of the things is it doesn't have a place to mount a winch because the hubs on the front wheels have coil winders, so you can just coil your cord, retrieval cord, whatever on there, and the front wheels become the winch. The other thing is the floor mats in the driver and passenger area, and then the back too, are not normal floor mats. They're actually beautiful wood panels, and that's original. They look a lot like the deck of a boat. So it has wooden floor mats. The other really neat thing of interest about his vehicle was that it still had the original infield British artillery rifle in the back.
Nice.
He has to be careful where he goes, showing his weaponry in the vehicle, but the vehicle is complete.
That's very cool. Very cool.
That's very impressive, and it looks like it's in great condition from the photos you sent.
It is it is basically original. The person who had it before him restored it to this condition, which is great. The only thing they did was they went kind of a safari route and covered the seats in a hide of some sort, the sort of what we visualize Western hide with the hair still on them, which is obviously not original. It looks kind of strange, but everything else in that is basically period. So very well done. Great vehicle. And just one of those things you just don't expect to see drive up.
Is it aluminum or is it steel? Do you know?
It is steel. It is actually steel, unlike the Land Rover.
So that would be different there. So, how long have you been involved in British cars, and how did you get that bug? Because apparently, I know you drive a Discovery 2, so you bleed some green, and that means money. That means money in America.
Yeah. Well, I drive a Discovery 2 now. I have been involved in British cars for 35 years or so. My first car was an MGB GT when I was in college.
Okay.
And basically at that point, I could afford to buy the car, but I couldn't afford to get it fixed. So I figured out that I was going to have to work on it myself. And that's how I sort of got into it. And I ended up spending so much time at the local parts store that was not too far from my house that he was finally like, why don't you come to work for me? It's like you could start paying off some of your parts by working here. So my college job was actually working at a foreign car parts place. Land Rover's come in the story because I wrecked the MGB and I had nothing to drive. And he's like, okay, well, I need you to get to work. So why don't you drive this Series 2 Land Rover of mine? And I'm like, great, that's great. He's like, yeah, all you got to do is get it running. I'm like, oh. And luckily, all it needed was some clutch work. But I got the Series 2 back on the road. So for about a year and a half or so in college, I drove. I think it was a '71 Series 2,
nice,
which I loved. So I became a Land Rover fan, deep and hard. Then over the years, I have been through everything from MGBs to Triumphs to Austins, a little bit of everything. At the moment, I have an MGB, a Triumph Spitfire, and a '66 Austin Princess out in the driveway, in addition to the Discovery 2. So the blood runs Castrol
and Lucas.
Very nice.
And Lucas. I just got in only something that y'all would appreciate. I just got in the 2-volume book set of the 100-year history of Lucas. It reads like a Charles Dickens novel, but you can read all about how Joseph Lucas was born in 1834 and got his start with a light for the penny farthing bicycle, and all the way up through. This was published in about the mid 70s, early 80s, so all the way up through that period of the Lucas Company. I got it in, and my wife looked at me with this just look of disbelief. She's like, only you would read something like that.
Yes.
Fascinating, though.
Oh, like I say, finding out that Joseph Lucas, the founder of Lucas, learned his reading and writing at Sunday school because they taught kids at Sunday school how to read so they would read the Bible, but because the rest of the week he was an apprentice and had to work. So his only schooling came on these Sundays when they would teach them. But his father was an electroplater, basically a plater, and he apprenticed and then invented this light for the bicycle, and he just kept on inventing and became the Lucas that we all know and love so much today.
And despise a little bit, but
despise a little bit, yeah. Although that wasn't his fault, that was the later bookkeeper's fault, who made everything on the cheap.
Exactly.
That's their fault.
We just curse his name, not him himself.
Exactly.
So what else do you drive? You have a Discovery 2? Is that your daily driver?
The Discovery 2 is my daily driver these days. Actually, to relate it to something you were talking about last month, I was at Stowe last year. I'd gone up
Very
to the
nice.
show there, was looking at all the Land Rovers and looking at everything, and my wife and I were talking about, okay, we just British, the magazine needs to do more shows and we need to go to more of these things. And she's like, that's great. But if we're going to these shows and going traveling, I'm not riding all over the country in the Spitfire or in the MGB. We need something, a little more comfortable. And she's like, hopefully with a little more power than these. And so we started to talk about back and forth what it could be. And we hit on, of course, a Land Rover. It's got the power to pull my other cars when needs be, and can do everything we need. And I've always, of course, like I said, always loved Land Rovers. And the Discovery is, sort of, to me, that's one of those timeless designs. And I'm like, that's it. So I started, once I get that crazy idea, I tend to try to act on it fast. And I started beating the bushes and found a Discovery that I actually should have done more research into. It's the typical Discovery story. Oh, wow, the drive shaft needs replacing. Oh, wow, 3 Amigos are on. Oh, wow, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I know that feeling all too well.
Oh, well, okay, here's your Land Rover Discovery story for the day. So I actually bought the car from a gentleman who was in Jacksonville, Florida, it's about 4 hours from me. And I'm like, okay, well, we're going to split this and see how honest you are. If you could meet me halfway, I'll buy it from you, which means you trusted enough to drive it halfway. Plus, it got me in under the AAA towing distance.
Smart.
Yes. I was like, So I went and met him up in Savannah, Georgia, actually, and bought it from him. Okay, bought it. Yeah, I knew it had problems. Great, fine. Driving it back, when you would get off the gas pedal, this horrible rattling sound. And I'm like, okay, must be the typical Discovery drive shaft issue. So drove it the rest of the 100 miles home. Ordered a drive shaft. It was December. I decided I don't want to lie on the cold driveway. I'll let my local shop, a guy I really trust, let him do it. Plus, he can give the whole thing the once over. Let him put the drive shaft in. So took it, had it towed out to him. Got this call. He's like, well, you want the good news or the bad news? You always hate those. I'm like, well, give me a little bit of good news first. He's like, well, parts of the undercarriage will never rust because they have so much oil on them. He's like, and the other bit of the good news is you must be the luckiest guy I've ever known because you made it back. Like, as the Land Rover was coming off of the flatbed at his shop, the drive shaft literally fell out.
Wow.
And it wasn't, the front joints were bad, but the back joint where it joins the rear differential was held in by only 2 of the 4 bolts, and the center bolt that actually goes back to the rear differential had sheared off. So it literally, when it flexed enough coming off that trailer, it fell out of the vehicle. And so I'm sitting there going, so I drove it, 60, 70 miles an hour down the interstate with that. It's like, and not only that, but we must be the best mechanics because we were able to extract the sheared off bolt out of the differential with having to disassemble everything, and your vehicle's done and ready for you to pick up.
Wow. That
is a story. Yeah.
And it was like, oh, well, then I guess I'm supposed to have this Land Rover. It likes me. It got me home safely, and I should just keep up with it and keep doing everything else it needs.
See Morgan? See what happened?
Yeah. No, that's
you.
perfect.
No, you parked yours on the side of the curb.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I just have to make fun of Morgan for
I
that.
will tell you that. So started using it daily driver back in Charleston. There was a certain tow truck driver who was finally like, I recognize you. This is the second or third time I've come and towed this vehicle, isn't it? And that I take that as getting the bugs out. It blew a tire because I was running on the tires that I bought it with, and hit a major pothole, and it blew a tire. And I had no spare or no jack or anything else, so had to call the tow truck, which then led me to find out that obviously the wheels had never been off of this thing because loosening those lug nuts, which had been chewed up as they are on Discoveries, getting those off was a major event. And then I repaired the brakes and everything else and did not pay attention to the torque specs on the front brake caliper holder. And about a week later, the whole caliper came off of the Discovery while I was driving down the road. So the whole caliper came off and shifted to the front, ripping brake hoses and everything else. So I repaired that again and retorqued everything. Knock on wood, it hasn't been towed again since.
We were just, as you said, you're working out the kinks. You know, it's good to have a tow truck driver you trust that knows how to transport the vehicle. I think we all have those.
Yeah, the neighbor kid loved seeing it come home on the truck. He was so excited about the tow truck every day. I'm like, see, I'm really just doing it for the entertainment of the local kids.
Right. But that AAA membership pays for itself when you own British vehicles.
That's true.
Oh, it really does. The number of different cars that I have had towed with that, every time it comes up for renewal, I am just happily pay that. Happily pay that renewal.
It's cheap insurance, man.
Well, when you figure that one good tow can easily cost you $70 to $100, the membership pays for itself.
Yep.
Very quickly.
Well,
when you have 4 British cars, it pays for itself really quickly.
I used AAA so many times in a couple of years that they bumped me up. There was AAA, then there's like AAA Premium and AAA Plus. I think that there's apparently an unknown level that I got to that gives me one free 200-mile tow, not just the standard 100-mile tow. This is a once per year 200-mile tow, and I think I pay $144 a year for that.
That might be worth it as I expand the Discovery's range out. I actually did take it sort of almost circle back to your Land Rover content. Took it up to Overland Expo in Asheville. 3 weeks ago now?
Right.
And other than another tire, the tread separation, it ran great. It did fine up to Asheville and then through the Blue Ridge Parkway a little bit and back down.
Sweet.
So its range is extending.
Good. Yeah.
Very nice.
You need to run them. You need to run them, and then they will work themselves in.
They do not like sitting. Any car, really, especially British cars, they do not like sitting.
Well, and hopefully your climate is favorable enough for British vehicles that continuing maintenance, that's all you really have to worry about. Up here, we have, we're in the Rust Belt. So that's really the reason I had to get rid of my D2. I could keep it running, but I couldn't repair the rust fast enough.
Well, our problem here, I'm on the coast in Charleston, is that we have salt air.
Yeah.
So rust is a thing here. My D2 does have rust in those rear frame members that I'm looking at. I keep looking at that kit to replace it versus welding in panels versus some little voice that says, get a different one, get rid of this one. I'm like, but it's broken in now. I didn't want to get rid of this one.
Right, then you start all over with all the problems.
Exactly. I prefer known problems to unknown problems.
Agreed. So which vehicle did you drive up to, or did you drive to Stowe, or did you fly partway?
I will make the heretical admission that I drove a Hyundai Sonata to Stowe.
Well, that is far more comfortable for that trip.
I had decided to make it into a long vacation for my wife and I. So we went to Stowe and then circled over to Maine and then back down. And, we did a whole vacation kind of thing. And so it was just one of those things where you go, okay, yeah, and you're going to be gone for a week and a half. And it's like, let's take the Hyundai.
Yep.
Understandable. My daily driver is a Volkswagen Jetta. I do take the series truck out occasionally because you need to, and it's fun, and it reminds me every day that when I get in it, it's fun.
Now, if I had something that was big enough and that I had been driving long enough, I would have done it. Right. The last June, I want to say, I took my Spitfire to Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana and back. And it had only been on the road 100 miles. since I got it running again. It was a little bit crazy, especially since I went and did some mountain roads and did a few other things. But it turned out really great. It was also great that the friend that I was stopping at first in Ohio was really handy with a welding torch because he had to repair my exhaust and we had to repair a few other things. But it made it the full trip of that. I think it was 1,600 miles. I think I had the top up only 15 of those miles. It was a great trip, and it was a great shakedown cruise for the Spitfire. But you do that stuff a little bit differently when your wife is in the car.
Yes.
Right.
You know, what to you is adventure is not adventure to spouses and other people.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Very much true. So what happened to the Series 2 that you had years ago? Did you keep
the Series 2 I drove? The gentleman who owned it eventually traded it for I don't remember what to a guy who lives somewhere up in the Blue Ridge Mountains, and I never saw it again, unfortunately.
No.
There were a lot of different stories with that Series 2, things you learn to do and not do, things you, as we discover a lot with whether you want to call it overlanding or four-wheeling, to overestimate your skill is not something you want to do, which I did a number of times in that vehicle. And I would love to have it back, if only to apologize to the poor Land Rover. It survived a lot of things, and it survived me. You don't have a show long enough for me to go through all the stories. But
could be a special show.
Yeah, exactly. It was a great vehicle. It was great fun, especially driving that when you're in college. There was a local sort of diner restaurant that was old long enough ago that they would still run a tab for students, but they didn't know my name and they just put Land Rover at the top. I was just known as the guy who drove the Land Rover.
That's cool. That's cool. So tell our listeners how they can get to your magazine and what the content is. Before I do that, actually, I want to thank you. As I said earlier, we use your daily or weekly newsletter for the show, and I get a lot of good content out of it. Especially, thank you for putting together all the sales information because it makes it easier for us to do the show.
I sometimes wonder if anybody really wants to see all that sales information on Jaguar Land Rover sales and that type of thing.
We do.
But it is interesting. It provides a good trend analysis. So I'm glad to know y'all use it. If anybody wants to subscribe or take a look at the website, it's justbritish.com. And on the site, you can sign up for the free weekly newsletter that comes out with all the highlights of the news. We cover, like I say, everything from the modern stuff to the old stuff, events everywhere of all types and sorts, whether they be car shows or things like Overlanding Expo, which was obviously heavy duty on the Land Rovers. That was a great chance to play with the new Land Rover Discovery 5, which was an interesting vehicle to drive. So there's a little bit of everything out there, and we would welcome your subscribers. I really want to try to pull, on a personal nature, Land Rovers more into the fold of British cars. There's a tendency by Land Rover owners to sort of not be car people and not think of themselves as British car owners or British automotive owners. So you go to a lot of shows and there's not Land Rovers represented as they should be. I'd like to change that. They represent a significant part of British automotive history, and they're just flat out cool. I would like them to be better represented.
Hear, hear.
It hurt yesterday. On my way to the show, I saw a Series 1 on my short drive to the show. No paint, all aluminum, just bare metal. And it went the opposite way. I was just dying. And then I saw a Series 2 pickup on a flatbed circle the show but not come in.
Oh.
And I know of a Discovery Trek vehicle that I personally invited to come to the show, and he didn't come. You know, these vehicles are out there. These things are great, and I love people to be exposed to them. But trying to get them to come to a show where it's mostly sports cars is a little hard. I love the Stowe show in the fact that there are so many Land Rovers represented.
You need to come to Pittsburgh Fringe Grand Prix.
I was talking to a gentleman just a few minutes ago that hopefully this next year or the year after, I really want to do that.
Yeah, you got a place to stay.
Oh, great. That works.
Oh, yeah. That's because we...
And a place to fix the Land Rover.
And yes, you would, actually. Yeah, you'd have a place to fix whatever it is you brought, actually. Yeah, bring a Jaguar, and Harold will be very happy. Yeah.
Oh, that'll work.
Yeah. Well, thanks again, Michael, for coming on the show and talking to us about Just British Motoring, the online magazine. Any thought to making it? Is it always going to be online? No paper.
I have had that question more than I ever thought I would. At the moment, there is no thought to print. I have thought about doing special editions of things in print, but right now, most print media is going to digital, so I'm just starting there, and so I'm just going to stay there for the time being.
Thanks very much.
It was great to be on your show, and I'm proud to be a Patreon supporter of yours. As I mentioned a little while ago, you are the only podcast I actually financially support, which is horrible, and I should change that. But it's well worth it.
Thank you for reminding me about that, and I want to publicly thank you for helping us out on the Patreon and supporting the show, and I really appreciate it. I know you've been a supporter for a number of months, and thanks for coming on the show, and also thanks for doing what you do with the magazine. Thank you.
Yeah, now I've got to go fix the gas leak on my Spitfire.
Indeed, sir. All right. Thanks again, Michael.
All right. Thank you.
And now on the Centresteer podcast, a visit to Nirvana. I had the opportunity, I was going up to Quebec, and I had the opportunity to stop and see Morgan. And Morgan said, hey, we have an opportunity also. He didn't say hey. I hate when I say that. We had the opportunity.
I might have.
You might have. That's true. To go to southern Vermont and see what I'm now calling Land Rover Nirvana North America, to see Jim Macri's collection of series Defender trucks. And we took that opportunity, and it turned out to be a fantastic day. The weather was fantastic. It was warm. It wasn't humid. It was sunny the whole day. We able to visit the facility. He has a purpose-built building. Upstairs holds about 8 or 10 trucks, and then below it is the shop, and he has 3 guys that are working on the vehicles. He and took time to talk with us for about a half an hour and let us walk around and look at the trucks, and even we didn't get a chance to drive anything, but he did turn on the Centresteer prototype, which is our main conversation. And so we got a video of some of that, of all of that, his collection, and we're going to make that available, the video, to our Patreon subscribers first, and then later we'll make it available to everybody to see. But we'll give the Patreon subscribers an opportunity to see that first. So we did get to go up there, and so coming up here in just a moment will be our discussion with Jim Macri. I'll let Morgan do a little more introduction.
Before my official introduction, just another thank you to Jim Macri, because I have met him several times over the years, had numerous great conversations with him, and we had such a good conversation at British Invasion this year that the recording just did not come through. So he was kind enough to, allow us to come down and visit what we sort of call the museum, now fittingly, Nirvana, Land Rover Nirvana North America. It really is. So it was very nice to go down, do that, obviously to see John as well in person, and perfect weather for it. But then also we got to, hang out with the guys in the shop and talk to them for a little bit. Let's see, the chief technician is Glenn Parent. He's a great guy. And then he's also got Dana Earthrow, who's the senior tech, and then Jacob Parent is their assistant. So those 3 guys do some amazing work on those vehicles. As John had said at the sort of top of the show, they are immaculate, and I went over them probably at great length the last episode when I covered British Invasion. But yeah, it's just great experience to go see all those vehicles, see them in person again. I would highly suggest you showing up and seeing the vehicles at the various shows, or reach out. You can see the vehicles on highmeadowfarmrovers.com. They also have a Facebook page for High Meadow Farm Rovers. So yeah, go check it out and definitely see them if you get the opportunity. And now, without further ado, our interview with Jim at the High Meadow Farm Rovers farm, with specifically the Centresteer replica, the only real accurate replica of the Centresteer in existence. Amazing to see in person.
All right, this is the Centresteer podcast. We are in Saxton River, Vermont, actually on the road, doing cool stuff, doing a field report, I'm going to call it. And sitting next to me is Jim Macri. Jim, we're in the wonderful facility. To find this is amazing to me, and it's like nirvana here. This is amazing. How did this come about? We'll have pictures, of course, for people to see on our Facebook and also on the website. Thanks, Jim, for letting us be here. And this is how'd you get into Land Rovers, and how did this come about?
Well, you're welcome. If you like Land Rovers, this is indeed nirvana.
Yes, yes, I would completely agree.
I've been interested in Land Rovers for decades. Only perhaps the last 2 decades have I gotten into the acquisition and restoration of the various series vehicles. My interest in Land Rovers I can trace back to the summer of 1966 when I was a young college student working on the island of Martha's Vineyard, and the vineyard was crawling with Land Rovers. I'd never seen them before, and I kept seeing these really remarkable looking great vehicles, and I fell in love with them. At the time, I did not have one, and it took quite a while after that for me to get my first one. But that's where my passion about Rovers started. And of course, in 1966, I was looking at the brand new Rovers, which were the Series 2s. And they were just wonderful. And we have a Series 2 here in our collection. We have been, as I said, for a number of decades now, been collecting and restoring Rovers. And if you look at the sequence that we have here in the museum, it actually tells the full story of the history of the company, the Land Rover company. Starting, in fact, before the series vehicles with the very original, the granddaddy of all Land Rovers, and that is the Centresteer prototype. This was a machine that was created in 1947 by the then Rover Car Company. Right after the war, the British economy was in terrible shape, and the engineers at Rover Car said, we need to make something like the American Jeep. They won the war with this thing, and we really need to come up with something similar to that. And so they set their engineers on a 10 or 11 month project of coming up with the first prototype Land Rover, and that's it. You see it right there. It doesn't exist anywhere else. It's a all aluminum body with a Rover Car engine, and they did use some components from the old surplus Jeep, namely the chassis and the wheels. And they cobbled this thing together. It's, in my view, it's a beautiful piece of work, but it represents the very first Land Rover. There was no Land Rover, and that was it. And they finished that prototype toward the end of '47, and then they immediately went into the production of the very first production model Rovers, which at the time were not called Series 1. They were just the Land Rovers. Yes. And what you have here sitting right next to the prototype is no less than the 149th Land Rover ever made. So that's a very rare, beautiful vehicle.
It's amazing.
It is amazing, and it's in mint, brand new condition. It runs like a dream.
Yeah.
It is exactly as it was when it came off the assembly line.
It's probably better than it was when it came off the
It
assembly line.
probably is.
Let's face it.
And that is a 1948. In fact, we can trace the lineage exactly to September 1948. Series 1 Land Rover. And as I say, they weren't called Series 1. They were at that point called Land Rovers. The next vehicle in line is a somewhat later Series 1. It's a 1957, short wheelbase, again, pristine condition, just beautiful. Used to be my favorite vehicle in the stable here until the others came along, and frankly was the vehicle that won all the awards at the shows because it is an early Rover.
Yeah.
But now that has been supplanted, unfortunately, by the others. Following down the line is now what we call the Series 2 vehicles. And when they started calling that vehicle in 58 a Series 2, they then said, well, we'll call everything before that a Series 1. So that's why these are now called Series 1s. And actually, that vehicle that you see there is a 1964 Series 2A. We do have a Series 2. It's downstairs in our shop being worked on right now, so it'll be added to the collection, and we will have every one of the series vehicles in here shortly. But that's a Series 2A, long wheelbase, 109-inch. It's the old African safari vehicle with the safari roof, and there's an interesting story with that vehicle. I actually bought that as two vehicles, both of which were in very sad condition. We took them all apart, used the best parts, combined them, and made that really beautiful vehicle that you see sitting there.
And the trailer that actually usable. I mean, have you
now
used it?
that's a very good point. That trailer, which matches in year to the Series 2A, is a Brockhouse trailer. Very rare. Brockhouse was a company that began in England in the late 40s, early 50s, building purpose-built trailers just for Land Rover, no one else. And they only made 977 of them, so they're very, very rare.
Wow.
We managed to find that one sitting in an old barn in Massachusetts. We've completely restored it. The serial number is there.
Wow.
It's all original, and it's a lovely find. And we matched it to the 2A because of the vintage, the year. And as you can see, we matched the color and the wheels and the color on the wheel, the rims, etc. So that is an interesting find, and we had been looking for a Brockhouse trailer for some time, and we finally added it to the collection.
Are all the ones and the twos and 2A, the ones and the 2A, those are all North American vehicles originally here in North America?
No. First Series 1, the 149th, is a British right-hand drive, as is the second Series 1.
Yeah.
On the 149, we could trace the lineage exactly on that. It came out of the Rover company and went immediately to the Ministry of Agriculture, and then it was some years later sold privately. But that was a British-made vehicle, as was the late one.
Nice.
The Series 2A was an North American-made vehicle, yes. So from Series 2 and 2A, we then go to this beautiful mint green vehicle over here, which is a short wheelbase 1973 Series 3 Land Rover. Again, in perfect condition, runs like a dream. And now when you get into the Series 3, you begin to see a little more attention being paid to comfort. The interior, the early series vehicles had no concern about comfort.
Yes.
But the Series 3, the seats, the interior, the dashboard, are all very nicely appointed. They're fairly comfortable. The sound level is much better. And
well, that's relative.
Yeah.
I have a Series 3 myself. Yeah, I understand.
So we're getting into though a little bit more of the comfort factor.
Right. And the Series 3 is North American also?
The Series 3 is a right-hand drive.
Yeah.
No, it's a European version. And then, of course, following the Series 3, Land Rover went into the production of a really rather remarkable and highly successful vehicle, the Defender. Mm-hmm. And what you see there is a beautiful example of a Defender 90, really a remarkable machine, V8 powered, incredible off-road capability, just a really interesting and capable utility vehicle. They imported the Defender into the United States early on with the long wheelbase 110 versions, and then they added the Defender 90s, and the last of the Defender series was imported into the United States in 1997, and then following that, they continued to produce the Defender line in Europe, and it was only last year that, in fact, the Defender saw the end of its production life. So a little bit sad, but I'm sure, as they always do, Land Rover will come up with new and innovative models to replace that. But that's basically the stable here at High Meadow Farm. We're very proud of it. I think we've probably got the finest collection of Land Rovers, of vintage Land Rovers in the United States, and competes with probably anywhere in the world. My good friend Phil Bashaw from England, from the Dunsfold collection, has certainly got more cars than we do, but I would put the quality of our cars up against anyone.
And nobody else has a Centresteer replica.
Correct.
To an
Yes.
accuracy that you have. There's a couple out there, but they're not even remotely accurate.
No, they're not. The only one we know of is a rather poorly done. I mean, it looks somewhat similar, but I had the chance to inspect it. In fact, there are more mistakes on it than there are things that are correct. So, no, this is an absolute correct, accurate, in every imaginable way, detailed recreation of the Centresteer. We're very, very pleased with it.
It should be. It looks astounding.
Yeah.
Just amazing. And what was the reasoning behind it that you wanted to create the prototype, just to add to the collection and have that full the full range, even though there was only 5 or 6 of those, I think, originally even made at the time. And didn't they destroy them all, I think, also?
Yeah, the legend is they only made one and it disappeared immediately after production. I think it's safe to say that insofar as our construction of that vehicle required us to locate and obtain every known photograph of the early prototype and computer analyzed all of those photographs, I think we can conclude that there were at least 2 prototypes made. We can see that from different views on the individual photographs. And if there were 2 or if there was 1, they have both effectively disappeared. And the story I hear from authoritative sources in the field is that they were actually dismantled, taken apart, and will never be seen again. Why did we make it? Well, we have a very strong love of these vehicles. We feel they're iconic vehicles. I mean, anyone who sees a Land Rover, whether they're Land Rover devotees or not, they all recognize Land Rovers. It doesn't matter. You can park one on the street and people gather around it and say, oh, I remember this from when I was young and this and that. So as we were plodding along, building our collection, restoring, we're always asking ourselves, what are we going to build next? And we got to the point where it was very clear that we would have every one of the recognizable series vehicles. And I came up with the idea, well, the only one we're not going to have is the prototype. Why don't we build that? And of course, we were immediately told it's impossible. You can't do it. There's no plans. It would be crazy. And all of those comments were correct. It was impossible. It was very difficult. But we managed to get through. We did it. It was a remarkable exercise. It took us 3 years to build it. And we had more fun doing it than you can imagine. and I would never in a million years do it again. I mean, it was really a tough job, because we are rather particular about how we finish our vehicles, and we wanted this to be really a totally accurate representation. So it really was a difficult job, but we're happy we did it, and that's how we got into it.
Yeah. And the running gear and all the body work, was that all done here in?
Well, most of it. We had help with the body, of course. The chassis is a 1942 Ford military Jeep, GPW Jeep chassis, as are the wheels and the axles. The powertrain consists of a 1947 Rover car engine, a P210 saloon engine, and gearbox, the transmission. And that is all hooked to a Jeep transfer case, which then drives the drivetrains to the front and rear axles. And then around that central core, the chassis and the powertrain, is an all-aluminum body, with the exception of the rear tub, which was again part of that Jeep portion, and an all-aluminum body, which we had great help from a colleague up in Bethlehem, New Hampshire, named Joe Stafford, who is a classic Old English type panel beater who actually forms metals. Joe is used to working on things like Shelby Cobras and things like, but he loved this project and he undertook it and he did a great job on it. And of course, perhaps the most unusual feature of the entire vehicle is the placement of the steering wheel right in the center. The British, you have to understand, at the time in 1947, the war was over. They were really in terrible economic problems. They had to export products. They had to make money by exporting. And the Rover car engineers reasoned, let's build this. It's a great idea, but to avoid issues of right-hand and left-hand drive, let's put it in the middle. It was a neat idea, but it really is not practical at all. The other issue, of course, they focused on was it's going to be primarily an agricultural and as well a military vehicle, and farmers are always used to driving their tractor with the steering wheel in the middle. So all these things were kind of cute and interesting, but the more they got into it, the more they realized when we go to our production vehicles, the Series 1, they put it on their side, the right side. So it was, but that is one of the most unique characteristics of the Centresteer, obviously.
Have you driven it?
Oh, of course.
And how?
Drives like a dream.
Does it really?
Oh, yeah. The engine is beautiful. We got the engine from England. A good friend of ours over there sourced it for us and then totally rebuilt it and shipped it over here. And it runs like absolute dream. And the steering mechanism works beautifully. I mean, we've done a very nice job on the chain mechanism to drive the steering. And no, it runs beautifully. It's very peppy, and four-wheel drive, obviously. And
so that is how it steers from the center then, using a chain mechanism?
It does.
And not standard linkage with the rods?
It has a sprocket and chain mechanism which goes over to the left side of the vehicle. And since they used a Jeep chassis, once the chain goes over to the left side, it then links up with a conventional Jeep steering box and works fine.
And then so beyond the vehicles that you have here, you have a couple of additional Land Rovers. Well, behind you, obviously our listeners can't see behind you, but you have another unique Land Rover as well, and that's a little more fun for the kids.
We do. I decided to do that a number of years ago, and I wanted to build a small Land Rover for the kids. We went out and bought a brand new four-wheel drive electric golf cart. We tore it apart, And we then took Series 1 components, the wings, as we call it here, fenders and the tub, and we reduced them down in size. We had to make a new windscreen, and we literally built this little Series 1 Land Rover on top of the golf cart, and it really is remarkably beautiful, and it runs like a dream. People are amazed when they see it because they know it's a Land Rover, but they can't seem to identify what it is. And the one problem I have with it is that it came out too well, and so I can't give it to the grandkids yet, but eventually that will happen in a few years. Yeah.
And you also have a Range Rover Autobiography Edition as well?
I do. That's our family car, and that's the long wheelbase, which is a new Range Rover that they've come out with a number of years ago. All aluminum vehicle. It's remarkable. It's actually really, it handles and off-roads really, really well. They don't make an awful lot of autobiographies. I think at the time they were making a few hundred a year. But that is our family car, yes, and it really is a pleasure to drive. Yeah.
I bet. So do you have, aside from the Series 2 that you're doing now to sort of complete the lineup of Series through Defender vehicles, do you have any plans beyond that or not yet?
Well, not yet.
You need a Stage 1. You don't have. You need a Stage 1 to, take the Series 3, bump out the.
Not yet. We're thinking hard about that. We've got about a year to go before we really get into our next project. And the only thing I can assure you is that we will have another project. I'm not sure exactly what it is. But yeah.
And you have a pretty excellent team behind the restorations as well. So you have Glenn Parent.
Correct. We have three fellows working down there. Glenn, Dana Earthrow, who's second in command, and then we have Jacob Parent, who works assisting the two fellows. And I think it's safe to say that they're both, Dana and Glenn, are absolute first-rate master rover mechanics. They can take any one of these vehicles, take them apart and put them back together again. They know Rovers inside and out. They had worked on Rovers prior to coming to me, and the experience they've gained here in building all of these has been really remarkable. So, yeah, very capable guys. Yeah.
Very nice. And you have a very nice, museum set up here, and with the shop below it, which is quite spacious for them to work in. I know you bring your vehicles out to various shows, like I obviously see it at the British Invasion. I've seen them at Vermont Overland Rally a number of years ago, and some of those things, but obviously you said you just recently went up to Dartmouth for...
Yes, I was invited to speak at a conference on vintage car collection, and it was really quite interesting. There were about 50 people there, and they were all high-end Ferrari and Jaguar collectors and bankers who invest in these things, and psychologists who try and sort out what goes through people's minds when they buy these things. And then there was me with my Land Rover. And I think the most fascinating thing that I came away from in this conference was that all these high-end characters really loved the Land Rover and the story and the Centresteer, which was on display within the rotunda of the Tuck Business School. And the interest was just incredible. I was very, very pleased to see that. These are guys that have really, high-end cars, and they just couldn't get enough of this prototype. They thought it was beautiful and constructed beautifully. It was a very good experience for us too.
And it really is a work of art, and really an amazing piece of detective work as well.
Yeah, it really was.
Did you have any help from Land Rover itself, or have they expressed any interest in Centresteer?
Well, certainly they're interested, Help, no. That nothing they could do. They have no records of the Centresteer.
Right, just a photo.
Yeah. Right. We've had some other good things going on. Probably the foremost authority on vintage Land Rovers, James Taylor, just did an article on us for the magazine Land Rover Owners International, and he did a 6-page spread on the prototype, which is absolutely marvelous. That has generated lots of interest around the world. And we were interviewed not long ago by a classic Land Rover, another British publication, and they will be coming out with an article about not so much focused on the Centresteer, but our entire collection. Yeah. So those are fun things that are happening as well.
And so this is a museum. Is it open to the public? And when and if can people come at all? You call it a museum?
No, we call it a museum, but
you just go out. You just take things out.
I'm happy to show anyone, anytime. With nothing we like more than showing off our vehicles.
They are absolutely amazing.
But we don't charge admission or anything like that.
A couple bucks and a couple pounds in the till to help out, right? Help out the effort. This is fantastic.
So at the Dartmouth meetup, you said there were some psychologists there. Did they have any diagnosis for those of us who have been bitten by the Land Rover bug?
Well, they don't know anything about Land Rovers specifically, but they were more concerned about the psyche of these individuals who go out and spend a couple of $1 million on a vehicle that has 1,000 miles, and then for fear that the value will go down, they don't drive it.
Right.
And, it's just a vicious cycle of things there, which...
I always wonder about that, too.
I found very hard to sort out, and... when I spoke, I got up after having heard all this full day of lectures and the psychological approach, and I said that I really didn't have anything to say about psychology, and that I don't care if the price of my vehicles goes up or down, and I only talk to people in general that agree with what I'm saying, so that doesn't bother me. But that my view, my presence there, my message to them was simply my love of these vehicles. And I was amazed to see the reception. It was very, very positive. Yeah. When I speak to an audience, I can read the audience very well. I can see, am I connecting? And boy, I was connecting. These people were dead riveted on. They liked this. They were interested. And it was a pleasant surprise.
Well, it's a pleasure to be able to come see these again for me and for John the first time.
It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. I did walk in the building and I stopped. And I took it all in. I did. I don't usually do that. I was like, oh, this is in a special place. Good. This is fantastic.
We like that.
Yeah, it's wonderful. You said you have more things planned. There is more space here. You could easily get another 6 cars in here, I think, at least.
Easily.
Yeah. Are you thinking about going into the more modern cars, or maybe starting down the Range Rover, going back to Range Rover?
That's a very good question, and I'm not really interested in the modern cars. I mean, I have the highest level Range Rover they make, but, the Evoque and the Velar and all that stuff, I might end my interest at the discovery stage in terms of Land Rovers, but no, my real interest is in vintage Land Rovers. I love these old things. I think there's something about them.
Sure.
They're not beautiful. They're not comfortable.
Yes, they are beautiful. They're not comfortable.
They're not fast. They're not a lot of things, but there's something about them that really gets you.
Yep, the whole package goes together.
Yeah, right? That's
absolutely,
my interest.
Absolutely. Range Rover Classics, I could see that being a nice stage, because those are really those original Range Rovers are wonderful looking cars.
They are wonderful looking cars. Yeah. They had a very special look. Yeah.
They did. And it really created the whole SUV industry.
Absolutely.
And that's although others would disagree with them, but
No, I think it's true.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you very much, Jim, for letting us into your workshop and museum, and this is fantastic. I thank you for coming on the show.
It's a pleasure. It's always fun to talk to people that like Land Rovers. Yes.
I think we're a little higher up on the scale than like, but fair enough. Thanks again, Jim.
Obsessed might be the right term.
And that's the Centresteer podcast for October 2017, show number 55. I can't drive 55. I know that's still stuck in my head the whole show. I want to thank our guest this month, especially Jim Macri, for allowing us into Nirvana heaven in North America, and seeing the Centresteer prototype was absolutely amazing. Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it. He does take, as you heard, he takes the vehicles and takes them out and takes them to shows. So if you're especially up in the Vermont area and you get an opportunity, I'm sure you'll be able to see it. He'll take it out and take it on tour, and it's going to be in magazines if it hasn't already been. You'll get to see that. I highly recommend you check it out.
And he absolutely loves to show off those vehicles and talk to them. So, like John said, at the shows, but you can also reach out to him through the High Meadow Farm Rovers site, and he's likely to do a private showing as well. So, and an extra thanks to Jim for sitting down with us again, because my previous recording at British Invasion did not come out. So I greatly appreciate his time. And obviously, John, thanks for stopping by on your way up to Quebec. It was great to see you in person.
Absolutely. Went to Prohibition Pig somewhere in northern Vermont, which was outstanding. I highly recommend going to Prohibition Pig. Thank you for that.
Oh, you're entirely welcome. And hopefully next time we'll have a little more time, because this was a very rushed trip, but it was worth it. And
it was last minute, and it worked out. And then the next time, actually, I'd like to come up to Stowe and all those different shows that are out there. Maybe Michael could come up. Well, all three. We can maybe do a live podcast from one of the shows.
That would be excellent. When I was up there the last time, I looked in the window of Prohibition Pig, but I didn't go in.
Oh, you missed out. You missed out.
Yeah. Well worth it. Excellent beverages, excellent food. Definitely stop by.
Yes. And thank you, Michael, for joining us on the show today and talking about your Just British online motoring magazine. Thanks very much for contributing today.
It was my pleasure to be on. It was a lot of fun.
And where can folk find your online magazine again?
Just stop on by justbritish.com, take a look at the website, sign up for the free weekly newsletter. We would love to have you on board.
And thank you again for obviously not only being on the show, but being a Patreon supporter, and for helping us provide content through your excellent reporting on British motors.
We all got to support each other in this, and that's one of the things about British cars. We all need support now and then, so we're in this together.
Indeed, sir.
We certainly are.
And also thanks to the One True Packs for his continued audio production support. Thanks also to Rover owners and Rover Hall. We're still working to take over Centresteer.com in the American spelling. We'll get there. It'll happen. And unfortunately, Harold couldn't join us today. I hope he's still working on my 110.
Yeah, I think he just didn't want to be on the same show as me. I think he couldn't stand the competition, from somebody else. So
couldn't stand the heat.
Couldn't stand the heat of somebody who could also wrench on a British car and smelled of gasoline fumes like I do at the moment.
He may also be catching up on Lucas's, the history of Lucas.
Yeah, maybe he got hold of my 2-volume set of Lucas history books.
Well, that officially brings us to a close of show 55. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Reminder to visit our website for past show and show notes. You can connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can also directly support the show through patreon.com, as Michael has done. Once again, thanks, Michael. We'd love to hear from you and what you're up to in your Land Rover. Until next time, I ask you to share the show with one other Land Rover fan. Thanks for listening. Wave as we pass by.
If you like Land Rovers, this is indeed Nirvana.